When you first get into Diablo, it seems like the gearing system is very basic. A lot of it is very surface level and it doesn't seem too complicated, so you would think that it wouldn't be too hard to gear a character, right? Well, when you actually start to get into things, it can be a little bit confusing, and some people are still struggling to gear their character and get them actually pushing into endgame content. But don't worry, because I'm here to help. So today we're going to be talking about the three main things when it comes to getting gear: where to find it, what to look for, and just some basic overall tips for you. And at all during any point in this video, if you guys find this content useful, please hit that like and subscribe button. I'm just one guy, it helps me out a lot. But okay, let's jump into the first topic, and this is going to be where to find your gear. Now for this video, I am going to be assuming that you're already done the campaign and you have done your first capstone dungeon. Before you really get those done, you don't really need to be looking to min-max your gear all that much. For the most part, anything that has that nice green arrow on it is going to be an upgrade for you, but once you actually start to push into World Tier 3 and going into World Tier 4, that's when you have to look for specific stat lines. So, you finish your first capstone, you're in World Tier 3, what do you need to start looking to do to get better gear? Well, there can be quite a few options when it comes to it. One that's forced down your throat is going to be the Tree of Whispers, and a lot of people fall into that trap. But there are two main ones that I'm going to be recommending for you guys today. That's going to be Helltides and Nightmare Dungeons. Now I'm going to be talking about Helltides first because they're a little bit easier to explain. It's very simple. Basically, an area of the map gets taken over by the Helltide. This constantly spawns in mobs in a set area, and there's also those in-game world events going on all the time. By running from event to event, or even just killing packs of mobs, you can get so much gear, gold, and also the obols to gamble with. And gambling in and of itself is a very strong way to get gear, but we will talk about that a little bit later. Now, if you are looking to do Helltides, you definitely need to use the website helltides.com. It tracks a bunch of different things, including how much time is left, where all the events are spawning, and where all the mystery chests spawn. And mystery chests are super important when it comes to getting better gear, because you never want to open up any other chest when it comes to Helltides. I'm going to say this again because I really want to drill it into your head. If it's not a mystery chest, do not open it. When you open these, you're mainly going to be getting legendary gear, but when you open up one of the basic chests, you're probably only going to get one piece of gear, and it's probably going to be rare. Not worth it at all. Now, to counterbalance this, the mystery chests are 175 cinders, so they are pretty pricey, but once you actually start to get into Helltides and really start to understand them a little bit more, you can easily get up to 4 per Helltide. Now, there will be some RNG that is involved in getting 4, but you'll understand that once you actually start to run some Helltides. But you can see already, this is a great way to get some gear for your character. And also, it does come in waves, so you're not going to be farming Helltides constantly, and it is a nice break from farming other things in the game and can give you kind of that breath of fresh air and a change up. Helltides are very solid overall, and with the buffs that Blizzard just gave them, they're even better, so they're top tier in my opinion. But the absolute best way to farm gear in the game right now is going to be Nightmare Dungeons. Now, with the mega patch that Blizzard just released, they're really trying to push Nightmare Dungeons to be that endgame content. Before, it was actually better to just run regular dungeons and reset them and just constantly chain them. And Blizzard did not like that at all, so they massively buffed Nightmare Dungeons. And they made it a lot easier to run them because now, as soon as you pop the Nightmare Sigil, you're going to be able to teleport directly to the dungeon. But one of the best things about the dungeon is if your character is strong and can handle higher level mobs, they scale to the sigil and not your character level. They are 54 levels above the sigil. So take a look at what the sigil is going to be, and then you'll see what level the monsters are going to be. And if you're able to handle those higher level monsters, they're going to be dropping better gear. And not only are the monsters going to be dropping a ton of gear, but at the end of the dungeon, you're also going to be getting 2 guaranteed pieces of gear. And there's also going to be that invulnerability bubble that pops up, and you're going to be able to level your glyphs. And glyphs are pretty important when it comes to endgame. They make or break some certain builds. So these are the 2 main places that you're going to be farming for your gear. But now that you're actually getting gear to drop, what should you be looking for? Well, it really depends on the build that you are personally running. Each different build is looking for different stat lines on their gear because they're going to be interacting in different ways. Like for example, the background footage that you guys are seeing, this is my barbarian that I'm personally gearing right now. On weapons, Whirlwind Barbs want damage to vulnerable enemies, damage to close enemies, and then critical strike. Because close enemies are anything that's within melee range, you're making everything vulnerable with the build, so it just makes sense to have damage to them, and critical strike is always really strong. But if you take a look at something like a rogue, for example, they're going to be looking more for critical strike. So they're going to be dropping some of the other stat lines for more crit chance, more crit damage, and stuff like that. So when doing this, you're going to have to do a little bit of research into the specific class that you are playing. Now, some people don't want to follow a guide because they want to build their character all on their own, and that's amazing. All the power to you. So if that's you, just take a look at the kind of damage your character is doing and just start to reverse engineer from there. But if you are following a guide, they should have what kind of stat lines you are looking for. But this is another trap that a lot of people fall into, because when they're getting this gear, all they're looking for is those specific stat lines. They think, hey, this is what the guide is saying to have, this is exactly what I need. But that's not the case 100% of the time. If the item has 1 to 2 of the stat lines that you need, you can definitely run that piece of gear if it's an upgrade overall. And because you're getting a bunch of gold from running the dungeons and Helltide events, you can go to the occultist, enchant the item, and re-roll one of the other useless stat lines. I'm going to go back to my barbarian. I don't care about overpowered damage. So if I have a weapon that has critical strike, vulnerable damage, and overpowered damage, I'll go to the occultist, I'll re-roll the overpowered damage, and look for something like damage to close enemies. I see way too many people make the mistake of salvaging a piece of gear because it didn't have all 3 stat lines already rolled onto it. The occultist is super strong, and it can get a little pricey, so I would only recommend doing this 1 or 2 times before it really starts to get out of your budget. But even then, you can start to roll into different pieces of gear, and they might be upgrades. Like again, for example, you have 2 out of the 3 stat lines that you need, and you re-roll the one that you don't need and it becomes a semi-decent roll. Like maybe it gives you a plus to different stats, or maybe it gives you max life, or even thorns. A lot of builds are going for that now. So you can use that as a very solid placeholder in your build until you are actually able to reach all 3 of those stat lines. Rerolling on the occultist is extremely powerful, and if you guys are not doing it already, you absolutely have to, because it can be an absolute game changer for you. Now, I am sorry, because this is very surface level. It's me just essentially saying, hey, figure out what damage you do and just go for that on the gear. I understand that, but if I was to go over literally every single class and every single build in this one video, it would make it way too long. So if you guys want to see me make different videos where I break down all the classes and the different stat lines that they're looking for, let me know, because I'll make them if enough people want to watch them. But now we've reached the 3rd topic, and this is just some general overview tips. And the first one we're going to be talking about is gambling. I did say that we're going to be coming back to that. Now, when you're running those Helltide events, you are going to be getting the obols to gamble. And obols are very strong because you can specifically target one particular piece of gear. Now, while you are leveling up, you usually want to gamble for the gear that's falling the most behind. Like if your boots are really out of date, you usually want to gamble for boots. But once you push into World Tier 3, it's going to be a little bit different because you're probably going to want to target farm jewelry. Jewelry is one of the hardest things to upgrade in your build, at least in my opinion. I find a bunch of really solid weapons all the time, but one thing that I never find is better jewelry. So what I like to dump my obols into at first is better amulets, and then I go for rings afterwards. Because jewelry is so hard to find, you're going to be replacing it a lot less often. So it is worth it to spend the obols on those, because if you spend a bunch of obols on boots, you might find brand new boots right after because they drop a lot more frequently. But that's not the only way that you can use gambling to your advantage. One of the strongest things in the game that make or break builds are the aspects that you put on specific pieces of gear. And the offensive aspects can be really good, but sometimes finding a high rolled aspect isn't the easiest. So a great way to get those high rolled aspects is to gamble for gloves. They're cheap and they can roll the offensive aspects on them. And if you find a really high rolled one that you need, you can just rip it off at the occultist and you have that in your bank ready to go when you find a good pair of gloves. Or another thing you can put an offensive aspect onto. This is one of the ways that I actually got a lot of really good aspects on my rogue, and it does work extremely well. So definitely use it to your advantage. Now tip number 2 is going to be about target farming specific gear in specific dungeons. Now, I'm going to warn you guys, this I have tried to test and I haven't really seen a lot of success with it, but other people do swear by it. So just take this with a little bit of a grain of salt because it might just be placebo for some people. But supposedly, the different enemies that you do kill in different dungeons have higher chances of dropping specific gear. So if you're looking to target farm something in particular, you can go after those enemies. Now, there's too much for me to read, so if you are interested, just pause the video here and take a look if you'd like. But again, I did try to run this with my brother and try to target farm helmets, and it didn't really work, but other people do swear that it does work, so try it for yourself. I'm just here to pass along information. And the last thing that we gotta talk about is avoiding burnout, because Diablo 4 has a very Diablo-esque endgame. And if this is your first experience with an ARPG, or maybe you're coming from a different one like Path of Exile that have extremely in-depth endgames, you might not know how Diablo endgames really work. But these endgames have always been getting the best gear that your character can get and then, starting a new one potentially. Or Lord of Destruction. Basically, the endgame was just running Bale or maybe even Ubers if you were a smiter. And this is very similar. But a lot of people are facing a ton of burnout because they're just forcing themselves to run the same content over and over and over, and it is harming their mental state because, sometimes it's not fun to smash your head against a wall. So even though I do recommend Helltides or Nightmare Dungeons, if you don't find those fun, take a break from them. Go do Tree of Whisper stuff. Go run around and find in-game world events. Go do side quests that you missed. Go do renown farming. Literally do anything that you want to do, because as long as you are killing mobs, you are going to be dropping gear in the long run. Helltides and Nightmare Dungeons are just the most efficient way. But if it's burning you out, you're not going to play, and if you're not playing, you're not getting gear. So do the stuff that you enjoy. And speaking of enjoyed, if you guys enjoyed this video, again, please hit that like and subscribe button. It really does help. And thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.